Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro, friends. Today's episode of the podcast is brought to you by Coffee Fest. Hit the link in the show notes below to get access to the workshop that I'll be doing next week, in fact, in Tacoma, Washington for Coffee Fest. The leadership workshop can be found at coffeefest.com/leadership. Today on the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward, we're going to run through the discussion that we had yesterday with Chad Trewick or Trewick as it's said with the accent, on yesterday's podcast. And we're going to explore that in the context of the challenges that are ahead for all of us in coffee, because it wasn't one of those discussions that gave a lot of hope. Now, I know you guys know that this podcast is all about presenting a balanced approach to all of the discussions that we have, whether that be about employment, whether that be about business ownership, the coffee supply chain, etc., etc. Some people think I'm a pessimist. Some people think I'm an optimist. The truth of the matter is I'm neither. I look at the world from the perspective of a realist. And the reason that that is so important is because I'm a solution-driven person, and I don't believe that you can actually access solutions that can drive change unless you're prepared to look at situations for what they really are. And I'm going to be straight with you, friends. The situation that is currently presented to us in coffee is not looking good at all. Now, I'm going to break it down a little bit for you if you haven't had a chance to listen to a lot of the longer format conversations that we've had on the podcast. And if you have listened to the conversation with Chad Trewick yesterday and it perhaps went over your head, that's understandable. This is a very complex but very serious situation, and it's not new, unfortunately. It is something that has been culminating over the last 40 years. The issue that is currently with us, and we don't know if it's too late. We don't know if we can fix this situation. But what we do know is that there are more and more people who are being, and by people I mean producers, who are being sucked into a consequence of the coffee price crisis. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what I mean by the coffee price crisis, currently the C market, which is the exchange under which coffee is technically supposed to be futures traded through the ICE exchange, and I think that there's a couple of other exchanges, sets the price directly or indirectly at just a smidgen above $1 a US per pound of coffee. Now, I'm going to make this very general and very basic. If you want to understand the details of this, check out lots of episodes of the Daily Coffee Pro on this that will help you get into it in detail, or check out discussions that we've had with many people on the podcast about breaking this down. But here's the situation. The cost of production of a pound of coffee is not $1 a pound, particularly for smallholder producers who have to hand pick. Now, there's a different economy of scales for people, particularly in places like Brazil, where coffee picking is mechanized. So they send these huge machines through the crops and they just pick everything all at once. In smallholder farms, and in a lot of the farms around the world that aren't these huge, massive scales that have these ginormous yields, you have workforces that have to go through all the plants, a number of passes, because the cherries that are currently ripe get picked, and then the ones that are not have to be picked once they are. So they're very labor intensive. harvests. These kinds of practices, coupled with the fact that climate change is making it so that harvests are happening the whole year round now, so that you're getting cherries popping up throughout the whole year, and crops are maturing at different rates than what producers are used to, so they're unable to plan their workforce and how they're going to approach the harvests. So seasons are off schedule. All of these things mean that the cost of production is much higher than what the C market is setting it at. Now, I know some of you are saying, but I deal with specialty coffee and that's independent of the C. Well, it's not. So what we've come to understand is that even though we like to think that it is independent of the C market, the price that people are determining the contracts for specialty coffee is indirectly correlated or directly correlated with the price that the C is trading at. And it's not just that. People who are producers can take their cherry to milling wet mills. They take the cherry, they sell the cherry at a price that is determined by the C price of the day. And so this price is heavily determining what coffee is being dealt at. The massive variable in this C situation is that we have what we call coffee speculators. Now, speculators in the commodity market are people who have nothing to do with the industry, that they may have something to do with the industry, but they're not trading on the C market in order to take ownership of the coffee that they're buying contracts for, or to sell the contracts that they currently own. They are using it as a mechanism to make money, or they're using it as a mechanism to do what we call hedging. So they're using that as a way to mitigate risk from the contracts that they have in actual real life. So speculators can be people who actually work in the coffee industry, but they also can be people who do not work in the coffee industry and just have been told to start, or they have decided to trade in coffee commodity futures, coffee futures, and buy and sell to make money. Now, we have this situation where they provide a lot of liquidity into the market. And what that means is they make the market filled with money. And so it keeps it moving. That's one part of it. The other part of it is the real cash market isn't dealing with that kind of a reality. So the cash market, the real life situation with regards to coffee, having to sell coffee at whatever the C market, commercial grade coffee, having to sell it at the same price as what the C market is being dealt, but their cost of production is much higher and they can't afford to have some sort of a hedging mechanism like a lot of the big importers and exporters can do. These producers don't have a mechanism. They don't have spare cash to go and hedge against what they're selling, so that if there's a difference, they're able to mitigate their risk on that. So to make that more simple, the price that's being set for a lot of these farmers by the C market is well under what their cost of production is. Add to that the cost of doing business is much higher than the cost of production. So think of the cost of production as the cost of goods. And then on top of that, they have fixed costs, like their interest rates on their loans that they have to take from the bank just to keep their farms going. A lot of these are at interest rates around 30 to 50%. And the other fixed costs that are involved also get piled on top of what it costs to do business as a coffee producer. So they're out of money big time. They're out of pocket. The result of a lot of this, what I call the fuckery machine, is that these farmers are now cutting down their trees, or they're just going bankrupt and closing their farms. The long-term effect of this, and we are now in the long-term effect of it, because they've gone through a number of price crises with crashes that have happened again and again and again. The result of that is that we're going to run out of coffee. The prediction is that coffee will become a luxury item in about a decade. And what do we do? I know you're thinking like a decade's a long time away. It's not. It's not at all, because we're starting to feel the consequences of that now. If we have a chance at fixing this, and that's a very, very slim if, you've got to act this year. Like the next 12 months is it. I would suggest, if you are in any way, shape or form dealing with buying green coffee or buying roasted coffee, you've got to make sure that you secure your supply chain. And how I suggest that you do that is by building direct relationships either through an importer or through social media with people who are producing coffee, specialty coffee, or commercial coffee. But you've got to start having serious, real conversations with producers about what it actually costs them to produce it and what's a fair price for them to be paid, so that you can secure a long-term supply chain solution. Because if you don't, you're going to be spending a fuck ton of money on green coffee into the future. This is not going to go well, friends. And I'm not trying to be alarmist here. I have been having very deep, very serious, very confrontational conversations with people at least the last 12 months on this podcast and behind the scenes. And I got to tell you, all the people that are in the know are saying it's too late. If you want to secure your supply chain, you've got to start dealing with farmers direct and investing the money into their farms so that they can keep their farms. You've got to commit to buying multiple seasons worth of crops and working with them to keep improving their crops so that you have a secured supply of coffee into the future. Other than that, if you don't get on that this year, 2020 is going to be the last year, in my opinion. After that, it's going to be too late. Most of these farmers, these smallholder producers, are going to be out of business. They can't survive another harvest doing business this way. If you have any questions, either email us, support@mapperforward.org, or pop your questions and comments in the comment section below and let us know what you think. Next week on the podcast, we've got Peter Roberts. He's a professor that is working on the Specialty Coffee Transaction Guide, and it is going to be the second half of the conversation that I had with Chad, and he's going to be talking about the very real economic consequences of this situation. We take the idea that there's coffee, endless supplies of coffee in the world, for granted, and I assure you that we are being very arrogant and very naive about the actuality of the situation. We've had it far too good for far too long. Peace, love, and peanut butter, friends. Have an amazing rest of your day.